Well, I think that my transformation to becoming Muslim began when I was a teenager. I was very active in the church. I believe that I was a pretty strong Christian. I studied, I was pretty inquisitive. I had a lot of questions. I actually got on a lot of the clergy members' nerves. I annoyed them because every Sunday I was like, I read about this and can you tell me more about this? And he kind of answered a lot of my questions. As I got older, I actually had a mentor, and her name was Yvonne, and her husband's name is Jose, and they taught me a lot spiritually. We used to have these conversations about spirituality and what it means to be Christian, and I became closer to God in that way, and I always thank them for that. I was in church and I felt like I began to experience something different. I grew spiritually. I experienced this exponential growth in my spirituality, and I felt closer to God than I had ever felt before. But I would pray and I would go to the altar and I would worship God as a Christian, and I started to feel like there was a cap. Like I wanted to get closer to God. I felt like something was wrong. I wanted to get closer to God. I wanted to be closer to God. I wanted to learn more about Christianity. And I started to do something that I'd never done before. I would pray and I would prostrate to God. And instead of worshiping God through Jesus, instead of using an intercessor, I would worship God directly. And I had no idea that this is what people do in Islam, but I started to do it on my own, and it changed my life. And I did this up until I began to go to college, and I sort of had this newfound freedom, and I wanted to let go of some of the difficulties that I had in my past in the home, and I wanted to become a better Christian, but I also wanted to figure out who I was. And my first roommates in college, I had two roommates. One of my roommates was Hebrew. She was Jewish, very devout. She practiced the Sabbath every weekend. She read the Torah. She knows some Hebrew, and we used to have these in-depth discussions about religion. And then I had another roommate who was Catholic, and alhamdulillah, she actually is Muslim now. She said Shahada last year on Eid. But we would sit together and we'd have all of these discussions, and she would tell me, if you feel like you can't get closer to God, it's probably because you're worshiping Jesus. And I'd think about it and I'd be like, oh, well, you don't know anything. I've always done it this way. It's not going to change. And she would tell me about how Judaism and even Islam, she would talk to me about Islam, and she would tell me, Muslims and Jews, we have these guidelines of how we live life. Our religions, they have laws and rules to solve all of the problems in life. And this is something that I was looking for. When I was Christian, it's something that I was looking for. I wanted a direction. I felt like I would go in church on Sunday and I'd ask for forgiveness and I'd worship God. And then throughout the week, it sort of wore off and I'd make the same mistakes. And then I asked for forgiveness again and I would make those mistakes again. And I wanted to know, there's got to be a rule book somewhere. There's got to be something that can tell me how to live my life. There's got to be something that I can do. And she actually introduced me to her friend, Maya. And Maya is Egyptian. She's Muslim. And she started to tell me about Islam while my Jewish roommate was telling me about Judaism. And I was more attracted to Islam because I felt like it didn't have any serious national ties. There was no sort of nationalistic agenda. I felt like Islam is something that everyone can be a part of, no matter what race you are, no matter your background or what religion you came from or what sex you are or the color of your skin. And I was very attracted to that. And she would tell me these things that I was absolutely fascinated about. She would tell me about how Islam, how Muslims made all of these innovations in science. And she would tell me about how Muslims prostrate on the floor to be closer to God and how Muslims worship God directly. And I was like, I've been doing that this whole time. This is something that I can be a part of. So I learned more and more about Islam, and I actually came to the mosque here because I feel like this mosque has been very influential in my development as a Muslim. I feel like I learned so much here, and I feel like I've definitely been accepted by a lot of people here, and I've grown as a Muslim through some of the programs that are here. And I actually came here. This is the first mosque that I had ever been to, and I met with the imam here, and I asked a lot of questions, and there were some things that I didn't understand because I wasn't Muslim, and I felt like I was going to be a little arrogant and challenge all of these things and find out the true story. But alhamdulillah, I became Muslim. I said Shahada. I didn't say Shahada in the mosque. I was a little intimidated and afraid. I was like, people are going to be hugging me, and I just don't know how I feel about that, saying it on a grand scale, because then everyone will know. So I said it at my university. I had a witness, and I said it there, and I felt, I didn't feel this huge change internally. I just felt like, okay, now it's time to get to work. I have a lot that I need to do. I have a lot that I need to learn. So I went home and I read Quran, and that's when, after I said Shahada, I began to face a lot of challenges that I think a lot of converts go through. I started to lose sight of who I was, because I had to figure out, how can I take my identity and how can I combine it with Islam? Like, can I be my old self and still be Muslim? How am I going to tell my family? What will they think about it? I did tell my family, and overall they were accepting. I don't think they're too happy about it, but you know, they just say, okay, well, this is the thing that you want to do. My biological father, I told him, and he was okay with it. He was like, oh, that's a great idea. My grandfather actually is a preacher. He's a preacher. He's been a part of the clergy for maybe nearly 40 years, and he's actually the head pastor at a church in Oklahoma. And he was accepting. I mean, he has Muslim friends. He's completely okay with it, and he actually used it as an opportunity to tell me about how Islam has been beneficial to the Black community in America. So I had become Muslim, and I was learning about Islam, and I felt like I was losing sight of who I was, and I actually went through a period of depression. And I feel like some converts go through that. You kind of feel alone at times. You lose your old friends, and you maybe don't feel, the Muslim community is new to you, and you may not always feel accepted. So it was definitely something that I had to work on to sort of find out who I was and to come out of my shell and to become more involved. And I did, alhamdulillah. I'm very happy about that.